Hello, Year 9 and 10. I hope you're all doing well. It is Miss Jewis here, and today we are going to have a lesson revising William Wordsworth's The Extract from the Prelude. We're going to look at the first half of the poem today. So for a do now, what I would like you to do is write down your own definitions of the key words there on the screen. So the first word, title of the poem, Prelude. The second word, romanticism, and the third word, sublime. Star challenge there is just to mind map anything you can remember about the Romantic era. So pause the video now and give yourself a couple of minutes to just write down the definitions of those words. Okay, hopefully we've done that now. So that first word there, prelude, is basically means an introduction to something. Okay, so this was the beginning part of a really long poem that William Wordsworth wrote. The second word there is romanticism. So this was a literary and artistic movement in the 1800s where poets and artists dealt with themes such as nature, emotion, the power of the individual. The third word there is sublime, and this word means something has great excellence or beauty, then you would describe it as sublime. Okay, so you can see there what we are doing today. So we're revising the poem. We're going to go through some key contextual points, so looking at the background of the poet and the poem itself, and then we're going to answer some questions based on the poem. Like I said before, just looking at the first half of the poem today. This is one of the poems that you can write about in your literature GCSE, so it's part of that poetry anthology, and you're going to need to know the poems really well, as you're only given one poem in your exam and you need to be able to compare it to another by memory. So last time, your last lessons, you were looking at the poem Exposure. This poem, the Prelude, looks at similar themes, looks at the theme of nature. So they are two poems that you might compare in your GCSE. So we'll have a look at that as we go through this lesson. So let's start. Thinking about the context, can you just make a list or mind map anything you can remember about the context of the poem? So you will have read this in class before, so just have a think back. Do you remember anything about the Romantic era? I just gave you a little bit of information in the do now. Okay, see if you can remember anything else. Can you remember anything about William Wordsworth himself? And can you remember anything about nature? How the sort of romantics, people in that era, how did they view nature? What were their thoughts on it? Okay, so again, a couple of minutes, just pause the video, write down what you can remember, and then when you come back, we'll go through some of these ideas. Okay, so pause now and write down what you can remember. Okay, hopefully we remembered some interesting things. So let's have a look with William Wordsworth. Who was he? So he was born 1770, died 1850. He is considered one of the most famous poets in the history of English literature. He was born in Cumbria, which was part of the region known as the Lake District. Some of you might have been there. His birthplace had a huge influence on his writing. So it's a really beautiful place with some mountains, lakes, and he used that as a lot of influence in his writing. He had a really close friendship with Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and they helped begin this romantic movement that was so popular in the 1800s. Couple of quotes there on the side from him. Gives you some kind of idea what he believed in, what kind of person he was. So he's got come forth into the light of things, let nature be your teacher. So he really placed a lot of emphasis on the sort of power of nature, the beauty of nature. Okay, so can you add a couple of notes to what you have already based on this? So add a little bit more about Wordsworth and who he was. Okay, so moving on to ideas about Romanticism. Romanticism was a school of thinking which believed in restoring the balance between man and nature. With the Industrial Revolution, there was a sort of outcry that nature was being destroyed, things were becoming too industrial, so poets took it upon themselves to kind of bring that back, to save nature. They also believed that emotion was a key element to poetry. Some of the main characteristics of Romantic literature include a focus on the writer or narrator's emotions and inner world, so like their inner thoughts, celebration of nature, beauty and imagination, a rejection of industrialization, organised religion and social convention, idealization of women, children and rural life, inclusion of supernatural or mythological elements as well. Romantic poets were heavily influenced by the French Revolution. They detested, so they hated the absolute power of monarchies, kings. They instead focused on the power of nature, what that has over people. Romanticism can be viewed as a reaction to the reason and scientific outlook of the Enlightenment. Romantic poets avoided complicated verse in favour of easy to understand poetry for the common man, and they saw it as their duty to inform and inspire others. Okay, so again, just pause here, make a few notes on that information to add to your list or your mind map. Okay, this is an interesting idea, the sublime, which we're going to look at now, which is an idea that a lot of Romantic poets were really quite obsessed with, especially William Wordsworth. So it's a key idea in Romantic poetry. It basically conveys the feelings people experience when they see awesome landscapes or find themselves in extreme situations that elicit both fear and admiration. The British Library defines it as an aesthetic concept which revolved around the relationship between human beings and the grand or terrifying aspects of nature. And like I said, the Romantic poets were really obsessed with this idea. So what I'm going to show you is two paintings from the Romantic era that kind of highlight this idea of the sublime in two different ways. So the one on top there, the first one, it shows a man sort of on top of a mountain above the clouds looking out over nature, and it almost shows him mastering nature. So he's achieved this sort of sublime moment as he's admiring the landscape, and you can see that the scale of the image, he's quite large, he looks sort of like master, he's commanding over that landscape. The second image, the one underneath, is a little bit different. So this shows an avalanche. I think the painting is called Avalanche in the Alps. And you can see the human figures, they're circled in the red circles there. They are tiny and they look very terrified, running away in fear from this avalanche. And we get this sense that nature is so overpowering and so huge. So two examples of the sublime there. Okay, the idea that nature is to be admired and it's magnificent, and also the idea that nature evokes fear and it can be terrifying. So those two ideas of the sublime, of what nature can evoke, is present. They're both of them are present in the poem that we're going to read. If you remember, there's two sections to the poem. Okay, so there's that idea that nature is very sublime in two ways, in that it's admirable, but also that it can be terrifying. Okay, again, pause, make a couple of notes on this bit, and then when you're on pause, we'll move on. So the poem itself, it was completed in 1805, but Wordsworth intended it to be part intended to be part of a 3-part poem called The Recluse, which was never completed. So it was actually published in 1850 by Wordsworth's widow. So he didn't see it published because he wanted to finish a 3-part poem that he was writing. This extract comes from Book 1, Childhood and School Time. So it's an experience he had during his childhood when he was in the Lake District. And that's sort of what it might look like where he goes out rowing and where he was from. Okay, before we start reading through the poem, we're just going to go through a couple of keywords in the poem that you might not know. If you don't know the word, can you just write down the definition? If you do know it, it'll be a nice reminder. You don't need to write it down. So, first word is stealth. If you do something stealthily, you do it sneakily or slyly. Okay, so when you're very sneaky or sly, it's stealthy. Next word is idly. So if you do something idly, then you're doing it with no particular purpose, or maybe you're doing it quite lazily. Next word is craggy ridge. Okay, talks about craggy ridge. Basically just means sort of a rugged mountain edge. And you can see in the picture there, that's kind of what it would look like when it's all rugged, uneven, a bit pointy. And the last word, elfin pinnace. This basically means a fairy or magical boat. Okay. So write down any words that you don't know so that you know the definition of them. So looking at the first part of the poem then, I've done line numbers so that it's clear what bits we're looking at. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to read through the first part of the poem and then there will be some questions. Just to note, this is not a stanza as there aren't any stanzas in the poem. It's all one long poem. I've just split it up so that it's a little bit easier for us to read and to answer questions. But the whole poem is just one long continuous stanza. Okay, so where I've split it, they're not in stanzas. So yeah, as I said, I'll just read this bit and then I'll give you some questions to answer and then we will talk through it. So it starts off, one summer evening, led by her, I found a little boat tied to a willow tree within a rocky cove, its usual home. Straight I unloosened her chain and stepping in pushed from the shore. It was an act of stealth and troubled pleasure, nor without the voice of mountain echoes did my boat move on, leaving behind her still on either side small circles glittering idly in the moon until they melted all into one track of sparkling light. Okay, so questions are there. If you just pause the video now and give yourself about 5 minutes to answer those questions there. Try and answer them in as much detail as you can. And then when you come back, we will go through the answers there. Okay, so question number 1, we've got what device is used in line 1 and what is the effect. So it says one summer evening led by her. Okay, that led by her could be a sort of personification of nature, okay, Mother Nature, almost as if he's being tempted by nature to go down to the lake. Number 2, what tone is created in line 2? So he says he found a little boat tied to a willow tree. What that creates there is quite a calm, peaceful, rural setting. Okay, a little boat, it's not very intimidating, almost quite sweet, and tied to a willow tree, it seems quite idyllic and, yeah, like I said, very peaceful and calm, like nothing could go wrong. Number 3, how does the narrator feel about stealing the boat? What words show this? So we get the sense that he's quite confident in what he's doing and he enjoys it. So in line 4, the first word there says straight I unloosened her chain. that word straight, it makes him sound quite confident, like there's no hesitation as he's doing this. And then he also says it was an act of stealth. It's like he knows that he's doing something wrong, okay, taking this boat, but he's doing it very confidently, without hesitation. So that sense that he's enjoying it, he wants to be doing that. Number 4, what device is used in line 6 and what is the effect? So we've got "and troubled pleasure." So what we've got there is an oxymoron. If you remember, an oxymoron is when you have two words next to each other that sort of contrast each other. So we've got that idea of troubled pleasure. What that oxymoron does there is it hints at his guilt. Okay, hints that perhaps he's feeling a little guilty for stealing this boat. So it was a troubled pleasure. It was pleasurable, is what he enjoyed doing, going out, being one with nature, but it was troubled because he's feeling that bit of guilt. And then question number 5, in lines 8, 9, 10 and 11, what effect does the repeated L sound have? So in those lines, we've got basically, so leaving behind her still on either side, small circles glittering idly in the moon until they melted all into one track of sparkling light. What the L sounds do there is they maybe create the sound of the boats moving gently through the water, and the imagery creates a feeling of confidence and peace. Okay, what we get here is this very peaceful image. There's no resistance in the water, it's just glittering idly, melting away, sparkling light, very peaceful, lovely imagery that creates this calm environment, okay, for the beginning of this poem. You might have some different interpretations to those questions. I've just said what my interpretations are. If it is something that is still relevant, then you can be right as well. Don't think that it's wrong just because it's not something that I've said, okay? The next of the poem. Okay, so again, I'll read this bit of the poem and then I'll put some questions up for you to have a look at. So we move on. It says, "But now, like one who rose, proud of his skill to reach a chosen point with an unswerving line, I fixed my view upon the summit of a craggy ridge, the horizon's utmost boundary. Far above was nothing but the stars and grey sky. She was an elfin pinnace. Lustily I dipped my oars into the silent lake, and as I rose upon the stroke, my boat went heaving through the water like a swan." Okay, so there's your questions. Again, pause the video for about 5 minutes, have a go answering the questions, try to add as much detail as you can, okay, and then when you've finished, unpause the video and we will go through the answers. Okay, for question number 1, so we've got, how does the narrator feel in line 12 and 13? What words show this? So line 12 and 13, we've got proud of his skill to reach a chosen point with an unswerving line. The two key words I would pick out there, we've got proud and unswerving, and what that gives is a sense of confidence and also arrogance. Okay, proud of his skill. He thinks he's very skillful at rowing this boat and he hasn't got any fear, you know, of nature. He's just very arrogant, thinks that he's got a power over nature, can control it, and row through the water. And then with an unswerving line, again shows how experienced he is maybe and how confident he is. But we do get that sense of arrogance. You know, like he thinks maybe he's better than nature or has control. And he fixed his view upon the summit of the craggy ridge. So that's where he's heading there, we know, towards that peak of the mountain. So number 2, what does the description of the mountain in lines 15 and 16 show? So we've got the horizon's utmost boundary, far above was nothing but the stars and the grey sky. So what that gives us there is a sense of the scale of this mountain. Okay, we can tell here that it is a big mountain, okay, but we don't get the same description of it as we do get later on in the text. It almost hints at the scale and the size of this mountain. Okay, above it was nothing but the stars and the grey sky. Again, that imagery of the stars creates quite a peaceful image, but the grey sky may be some kind of sense of foreboding, some sense that it's not all going to go to plan. Line 17, she was an elfin pinnace. So that there is a metaphor to describe the boat, so describing it as a fairy boat. It makes it sound almost otherworldly, a little bit mythical, maybe quite magical as well. So we get the sense that perhaps this narrator, he feels like he's experiencing some otherworldly form of nature, okay, in this sort of calm, peaceful environment. We've got lustily I dipped my oars into the silent lake. And as I rose upon the stroke, my boat went heaving through the water like a swan. So question number 4 there, what device is used in line 20 and what is the effect? So we have a simile there, went heaving through the water like a swan. And that simile really shows us how confident and at ease he is on the water, okay? And that directly contrasts with the next line of the poem. So he went heaving through the water like a swan. Okay, he's confident on the water. All right, we get a little bit of sense there towards the end of the poem that it's becoming a bit more of an effort maybe to row through the lake. I dipped my oars into the silent lake. My boat went heaving through the water like a swan. So the fact that it's heaving, he's maybe putting a bit more effort into his rowing, but we still have that sort of peaceful, idyllic imagery, okay? And like a swan, they're very graceful creatures in the water. So that's how he sees himself. He sees himself as this person who is very graceful and very at ease and confident on the water and as a part of nature, okay? So the last question, what is the tone of the first half of the poem? So overall, I've said these words a few times, it's a very calm, peaceful, sort of rural tone that creates this image of the beauty of nature, mostly, is what the narrator is focused on. We have a lot of words to do with sort of sparkling, glittering, that give the sense that nature is very beautiful and this is a very sort of idyllic moment, and that he is enjoying being one with nature. We also get that sense that he's very confident, so perhaps doesn't see nature as a threat, okay? He's only seeing nature as beautiful and something that he has control over at this point of the poem. And then that all changes as we get towards the second half of the poem. So what we are going to do now is we're going to stop reading the poem there for today's lesson, and then we are going to do a little bit of writing on the bit that we've read so far, and then the next lesson on this poem we'll be reading the second half of the poem. Okay, so we are going to do a little bit of writing now. So we're going to answer that question there at the top. How does Wordsworth present ideas about nature in the first half of the Prelude? So you've got a piece paragraph structure there. What I would like you to write is 2 piece paragraphs based on that question there. Okay, so you've got your point. How does he present nature? Remember, we're only focusing on the first half of the poem for now, so we can maybe say he presents nature as peaceful, beautiful, idyllic, okay, however you want to. Try to pick out what devices, what techniques or words he uses. choose your quote. This is shown in the phrase. Explore. What does the language suggest? What does it make the reader feel? Zoom in on a word or device, and then you'll zoom out. Can you link it to any of those romantic ideas or anything about the context that we looked at the beginning of the lesson? So maybe can you link it to where Wordsworth grew up, how that influenced him? Can you link it to anything about those ideas of the sublime, what the romantic poets believed in? Okay, as a challenge there, you've got what you would have in an exam, which is to compare two poems. So you have looked at exposure in the lessons just before this one. So for the challenge, after you've done your paragraph from this poem, can you have a go and see if you can compare how Wordsworth presents nature compared to how Owen presented nature in exposure, and do a full comparison paragraph. Okay, so pause the video now. I'm going to try and do 2 paragraphs, so try to spend about 15 to 20 minutes writing these out for me. Okay, so pause the video now and then come back when you have finished your 2 paragraphs, or your paragraph from the prelude and then your comparison paragraph with exposure. Okay, we should have finished our paragraphs. Can you make sure you do send those to your English teacher for marking or for some feedback, so that they know you've completed the lesson and you can get some feedback on your paragraph to see where you've done well, where you could improve. And so just to finish off, a really quick quiz to see how much you can remember or how much you picked up from today's lesson. So question 1. What literary movement was Wordsworth part of? Number 2, where did Wordsworth grow up? Number 3, what word means to do something sneakily or slyly? And lastly, number 4, what device is used in this line when heaving through the water like a swan? Okay, so number 1, the answer is the romantic or romanticism. Number 2 is the Lake District. Number 3 is stealth or stealthy. And number 4, it is a simile. Okay, hopefully we've picked up something from today's lesson. You will hear from me again on part 2 of this poem. So I will see you then. Goodbye.